Okay. Gotta get a drink first. Sit down. He wants us to sit down.
Sit down.
Oh, look like we're official?
Official.
You want us to look at you?
You so bad.
I'm bad?
You so bad.
How did you know? I didn't plan to be bad.
Yeah, me neither, but it just kind of slips out. Yeah.
You're an old man on the phone. Do you think I was a young woman? No.
You are a young woman. I've seen pictures of you. How are you? You doing okay?
I'm doing good. That's funny.
Dr. Coates. And everybody gets quiet. He's not in trouble. He's not in trouble. I promise. Yes. Cool. What's on? Hashtag is L500.
What's the streamline?
I'm gonna get it.
Okay.
So we can get this thing on.
What you gonna let people know?
I'm gonna let them know that the great Dr. Allison Geist Johnson is
She's not that
about
great.
to,
I
is
wouldn't
about
know
to
what
bless
to.
us.
I wouldn't know what to do with the streamline.
She's about to bless us.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Orlando, Florida. Yeah, it's a good thing. Good thing. I'm gonna take this mic down. I am Siobhan Arline Bradley, and I serve as the Executive Vice President of Strategic Planning and Partnerships. And one of my responsibilities is to actually work with the faith community. So I see a lot of family members in the house, those that are in faith and in justice work. We are going to have a very serious family conversation today: faith, race, and politics. All right, faith, race, and politics. As you know, we've had a meeting prior to, it was a specified strategic planning meeting that we just finished, and now we are turning it over to open it up to the summit participants. Many of you here have a call and are already in ministry, and we are really excited about where the NAACP is intending to go with this work. I have the privilege of introducing three amazing people. You see Dr. Bishop Dennis Proctor, who is standing with me. He and I are going to be kind of doing the Cole Donahue Oprah thing, walking and talking, getting the theme out to the people, and then we'll hear from our panelists. Bishop Proctor is one of the bishops of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. Now, his territories go from Florida, Alabama, all the way up to New York. He goes to London. He's got an amazing territory. I need to get on his payroll. How do I get to go to London with him? He is also a member of the National Board of Directors and serves as the new chair of the Religious Affairs Committee of the Board of the NAACP. And he's going to open us up about this theme. What you will then see is I'll give the introduction of our two panelists, and then what I'm going to do is a little roll call. We want to get a sense of where people are from in this room, and you're going to hear some different perspectives. This conversation about faith leadership in the space of politics and race, and where the black church is, where faith leaders are, how relevant or not are we in this space, and what work needs to be done. And we really want to hear from all of you, okay? So Doc is going to get us started, and then we're going to get the ball rolling.
Thank you. We appreciate you. We appreciate all of you here, those of you who are streaming. It's good to have you share with us from wherever you are in the comfort maybe of your own home. How wonderful it is for us to gather together for a meeting of the minds. If a theological construct was necessary to frame part of our objectives for the day, an allegorical reading of a line from the Negro National Anthem is helpful. Stony the road we trod. The past few weeks, yea months, we have seen stones plummeting the symbols of authority and or oppression, and the news media observed the stones but didn't pause to ponder why the stones. This query was on the minds of the second generation emancipated Hebrew youth when they came to Joshua and others and said, "What mean these stones?" It is simplistic to say that violence is the voice of the powerless alone. We must understand what means these stones. For them, the stones represented a traverse over a way that with tears had been watered. For them, the stones were the calling card of an invisible God who had promised good to them. To them, the stones meant that we have seen our deliverance in the past. But what do the stones that we see mean today? To generations that don't know Pharaoh, don't know Joseph, may not know Jesus. What do the stones mean to those who have no church history, no religious roots? What do those stones mean to those who are modern day Moses and Jethro, but are seen as slick hustlers and media manipulators? Can we give an interpretation in a practical way so that those who see us will begin to understand us? And as it was stated earlier today by Dr. Freddie Haynes, how important it is not to look at our choices before you've seen our options. And so we have two great panelists, great theological minds, but also pragmatists who shall come and share with us, and then another whose name is not on the list, Dr. Delman Coates, before we receive the charge of our own Dr. David Goatley. So we're excited of what they're going to present, and we'll move out of the way so they can begin the dialogue, and then we will do, as you've said, with the Oprah Donahue model, and move around the room so that everyone will have the benefit of your voice.
So just so everyone knows, if you are online, if you are tweeting, the hashtag is L500. Hashtag is L500. At Leadership 500 is the Twitter handle of where you are today. We want to make sure that the people see us online. If you're on Facebook, like the NAACP L500 page as well. We have joining us the Reverend Dr. Allison Geist Johnson, who is an associate professor of historical and theological studies, who serves at the Proctor School of Theology as the director of the Doctor of Ministry program at STVU in Richmond, Virginia. Great school, great school, great school, great school. She earned a PhD in religion with a concentration in religion and society at Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She received a Master of Divinity from the School of Theology at Proctor, Virginia Union, and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from Northwestern. We got some heavy hitters on the panel. Please welcome Dr. Geist Johnson, everybody. Welcome her. And native of Boykins, Virginia, this is Pastor John Faison, who earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from the Virginia State University. He is a Trojan, and a Master of Arts in Practical Theology from Regent University. Pastor Faison served in the Field Artillery in the U.S. Army, served in tours in South Korea and Iraq, and since the call to service to the Lord in 2008 by resigning as a captain in the Army to pursue his full-time calling and ministry. He became the pastor of youth and young adults at the Good Shepherd Baptist Church, and has since been called to be the senior pastor at The Grove, which is Watson Grove Baptist Church in Nashville, Virginia, where now he has quadrupled the membership to over 1,200 members. One of the most sought after pastors and preachers in the country, has been featured on The Griot, an NAACP ambassador, father, I've got a wife here, father, husband. We're just excited to have this panel here. And they're going to start off the conversation. Our chairman has just walked in. We're setting up our stream. So please welcome our chair, Rosalind Brock, who is here. Thanks for joining us, L500, hashtag L500. We're going to start this conversation. Doc has set us up. The theme, faith, race, and politics. So panelists, take it to the streets. Give it to us real. So Dr. Geis Johnson, ladies first, we're going to get started with you.
It's good to be here. I have all those degrees, but I've been steeped in the black community in Chicago, which helps me to understand faith, race, and politics from a whole different perspective than anything that I've had to engage academically. And so I just, I want to start by just saying what I think specifically about race. And that is, race is a commodity to be bought, sold, and leveraged. And so I see that from a historical perspective. And since we're in Florida, I thought I'd share with you what the currency looked like in Florida in 1864. My picture's large. Okay, good, you can see it. And so when we're talking about race, we are talking about commodities of people whose personhood can be translated into property for the sake of profit. And so there's a part of me that deeply understands that this picture is no different in our lives now. So what you see is a little white baby boy in the corner. You see two voluptuous white women being attended to by a black woman. And right here, you think in the center it's a man, but this is a woman with bales of cotton. This is the currency in 1860 and is the currency now. And so for us to be able to talk about race and politics and faith, we've got to be clear that this country still defines most of its ability to create wealth based on black bodies. Okay, so when we look at the prison industrial complex, it's about incarcerating men and women for the sake of profit. The other day, I ran back into a document from 1951 entitled "We Charge Genocide," which was written to the United Nations to let the United Nations know that the act of genocide has been enacted upon the lives of black people. And the definition of genocide is not merely the killing of a group of people based on race or ethnicity, but it's also disempowering and destabilizing them. It's about healthcare, it's about education, and as we've seen over the whole time we've been here, it's about police brutality that is authorized by governments. Okay, so when we talk about race, what we have to understand is that our country is addicted to the profit of race and racism. And I think the only way that we get to overcome that is specifically for people of faith is, first of all, we have to understand that in some senses, many of us have been ushered into using this currency ourselves. And a lot of it has to do with the religious rhetoric that most of our denominations have been fed, which allows us to look the other way when our brothers and sisters are carted off, killed, or undereducated. Right? And so from my perspective as an ethicist and as a theologian, and something that I mentioned in our meeting before, we can't have a movement without a moral plumb line. So we can talk about doing initiatives based on economics, we can talk about doing initiatives based on education and, voting rights, but we will always be picked off if we don't understand the power of race and the severe investment in division amongst us. We've already seen it. I was mentioning to my colleague that about 10 years ago, I was just minding my own business, as most of us who have called to ministry are. And I just heard God say, my leaders have been seduced away, and now my people are vulnerable. And so all of us are living in communities where people are vulnerable. A large part of it I want to keep pushing is because we've internalized inherited theological perspectives that keep us from seeing how we ought to care for one another and fight for one another day by day and politically. The Black church is the organization, along with other national organizations, that can really have impact on doing the work that we need to do. But it can only happen if we develop our own theological plumb lines. I started trying to think of some tag lines that we have to be able to use in church. And I wanted to say something like, regardless, he is my brother and she is my sister. And so that has to be the hermeneutic as we engage any of the biblical texts. And as we hear the political rhetoric, we have to be able to say, regardless, he is my brother, she is my sister. Okay, and so, and the other thing that I probably shouldn't say when we look at especially biblical texts is that we have to understand that Pharaoh is so addicted to power that it becomes necessary to take your political power in such a way that you relocate it to the wilderness and you disrupt his economic system. So whereas we interpret that text as merely a group of people wanting to go out to the wilderness to worship their God, this causes the economic downfall of a community, of a society that is addicted to profit at the cost of the exploitation of people's labor. And so I guess when I think of the prophetic, when I think about the church, what does leaving and going to the wilderness look like for the Black church, for Black communities, in spite of the fact that we will be located on this land? Does it mean that we don't get bought off politically? Right? Does it mean that we don't get seduced away from real issues because somebody practices their sexuality different than we do? Yeah. You know, how do we divest of a system that is not only killing people of African descent here in America, but people in general globally? How does our faith have to respond to a gospel message that we've been giving that is predicated on this love for poverty? Right? I mean, so what I want us to do in these moments is to be able to ask some critical questions about this religion that we've been given that has distorted the faith that we really practice. To make the distinction, American religion is different from the practice of Jesus Christ.
Oh, God. Yes, yes, yes.
And so we're going to have to interrogate some of our religious practices and make sure it aligns with our faith. A faith that's big enough to be hospitable. A faith that's radical enough to rebel. And a faith that cannot be predicated on obedience, but instead is predicated on intimacy. Intimacy with one another, intimacy with God, and intimacy with creation. Okay? If we have that, we can address issues of food justice, we can address issues of mass incarceration, we can address issues of educational injury. We can address issues of poverty. But it's only in giving Pharaoh back his religion and going out to the wilderness to remember how to be community. Because that's what those 10 commandments are for. The plumb line, we're not going to kill each other. We're not going to steal from each other. We're going to honor parents because in slavery, the first thing you're taught is to dishonor your parents.
Yep.
Right? So there's some stuff in our faith that we've been given the wrong lenses to look at. And so instead of saying this is a way that we reclaim our personhood after being ushered into the space of commodity and property, we've been given this lens so that we would be the hands that kill our own children. And so for me, the prophetic has to do with refining our theological lens such that when we read living text and when we read biblical text, it aligns with something that looks more like the ministry of Jesus.
Let the church say amen. Amen. It's an honor to be here today, and I, like Dr. Geis Johnson, have probably or owe my background and my rearing in my environment to more of my socio-theological lens than even my education. I was born in a place called Borkins, Virginia. Borkins, Virginia is in the heart of Southampton County. If you're familiar with Southampton County, it is the place, the birthplace of the Nat Turner insurrection of 1831. It happened on a place called Cross Keys Road. My parents' house is on Cross Keys Road. So I grew up in that kind of environment. Mom and dad actively engaged in the NAACP as well as other opportunities to lift community. So that is my backdrop and my lens through which I see all of my experiences as well as the environment we look at today. Danish theologian and philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once stated that life must be lived forward, but it can only be understood backwards. As we view faith and race in politics, the black church cannot afford, as Dr. Geis Johnson says, to view this intersection of faith, race, and politics ahistorically. For as long as there has been black presence in the United States, faith and race have always been political. There is no separation. Our faith, given to us by our oppressors, was politicized because of our race. So white supremacy and capitalism are now embedded into our theological constructs. The fallacy of black inferiority was given the weight of divinity. It was not just that we were less than, it was God's will that we be less than. Old Testament speaks of this, the curse of Ham, the son of Noah. New Testament speaks of this in Paul's epistles, slaves, obey your masters. So in essence, to be a good American black Christian was to accept your plight and to do it well. Yet a true reading of the gospel and an authentic view of Scripture as a whole begs that we re-examine Christ in his true existence as a political revolutionary. Followers of the revolutionary Christ cannot be anti-revolutionary. One more time. Followers of a revolutionary Christ cannot be anti-revolutionary. That means the intentional engagement of faith and politics so that the race question can be re-examined. This is, in my contention, what it means to be prophetic. So the question begs, then what is our resistance to embrace our prophetic responsibility? The resistance to embrace prophetic responsibility is the reality that prophets die. It costs something to be a prophet. It'll cost you position. It'll cost you title. It'll cost you comfortability. It'll get you removed from executive boards. It will get you written out of plans. It'll get you ignored. It'll get you ostracized in your own city, in your own state. But the only way that prophets, P-R-O-F-I-T-S, can die is that prophets, P-R-O-P-H-E-T-S, don't mind dying.
Good stuff.
We must come to our own Gethsemane moments. We have to get to the place where we see the cross and we embrace it. We have to eschew our comfortability, our complacency, and even our own subconscious, and in many cases, conscious classifications. Come to the place where we say, like Christ, nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done.
Yes, you can clap. It's okay. It's okay. Doc, you want to get us started with the Q&A? That's the frame. We are now, we're getting the meat of what this theme was. And I think the vision of our chair was to be this intentional. And I want to honor this because we have a number of representatives here that are not just in the Christian church. Members of the Muslim faith are also here. We are interfaith today. So I want to honor that as well because that speaks to the volume of our reach and who the NAACP is. When we say faith, everyone's tradition is not in the Christian tradition. So I do want to make that caveat and say that today. So Doc, you want to get us started?
One of the questions that came into us was, where is the church and what is its role in the Black Lives or Lives Matter movement? Let's start there.
I think the church is in the streets. I think the church is embodied in the revolutionary moments of youth. Now, some of us are having service, and some of us are being the church. I mean, so I think we're only the church as long as we have given ourselves to this movement that started when the word was given and was reinvigorated when the word was made flesh. Right? I mean, so if we're talking about the church as an institution, we're still trying, on one hand, we're trying to figure out our identity. And on the other hand, depending on your denomination, you are scrambling to make sure you pay your, what are those things called? Assessments.
She's not talking about our church. She is.
Right. I mean, and I come to this because I did a little moonlighting when I was a doctoral student with the United Methodist. And this struggling church could not find the wherewithal to raise $2,000 for a summer program for the children in the community, Black Lives Matter, before a death. They were putting all of their efforts to send to this hierarchy that had its own agenda. I mean, so I think in each of our denominations and in each of our congregations, we have to ask the question, where is our church pertaining to how Black lives have to matter, right? And when we talk about matter, we're not talking about just being able to, okay, that's not a fire alarm. I was gonna take the mic and run. No, I'm just kidding. I think when we talk about Black Lives Matter, I think what we have to consider is ushering ourselves beyond this point of survival in America to really understand our power and our purpose in leading people back to what it means to be human. To me, that is the requirement of the church. So our children standing out, throwing rocks, protesting is the miner's canary, suggesting that the environment is toxic and we're all going to die if we don't mobilize.
Anyone else on that point?
On that point.
Where is the black church in the Black Lives Matter conversation? I would argue that the black church is very much active and very much engaged in the Black Lives Matter conversation. In fact, as you've gone throughout the different cities in which the movement came to the surface via media, there have been church leaders at the forefront of every one of them. We're blessed today to have one in the room. In Ferguson, there was Reverend Tracy Blackman, there was Starsky Wilson, there was a friend of mine, my name was Sean Jones, and Robert Charles Scott, and some others. In Cleveland, there's R.E. Vernon, there's Napoleon Harris. In Baltimore, there's Dante Hickman, there's Dr. Coates. There are leaders at the forefront, leaders engaged in the process of the Black Lives movement in these various cities. But I would argue that they're not enough. They're not enough because there seems to be a disconnect, in my opinion, for two particular reasons. There is, number one, an external disconnect in that when we hear black church, we all think monolithic institution. When we hear black church, we all look at it as the same kind of flow. And so we begin to think that every black church functions and operates with one mind. And so if all are not engaged, then none are not engaged, when that's really not true. The second one, I believe, is an internal disconnect. And this comes from an idea posited by Dr. Raphael Warnock in his book, The Divided Mind of the Black Church. He says that there's a divorce between the black church and black theology, in that black theology was birthed out of the black church, yet it has now moved into the ivory institutions, the ivory towers of institutionalism, and separated itself from the black church. So he posits that there needs to be a reconciliation between the black church and black theology. The black theology needs to apologize to the black church in neglecting the spiritual side of black faith. But the black church needs to apologize to black theology and admit that it did not embrace what King said when he said that to be socially minded and to fight for justice is really the true essence of what it means to be Christian. The two have to be reconciled. Black church and black theology come back together to help understand why or to see why black churches are not involved in movements like the Black Lives Matter movement. Too many churches see it as disconnected, see them as two different things, that I can love God and not fight for my brothers and sisters. There has to be a re-engagement of the two. The black church and black theology must come together and see one another as partners in the struggle, not as antithetical to each other.
I'm sorry. My name is Tracy Blackman. I'm a pastor from St. Louis. Ferguson has caused me to reevaluate my definition of church. And I get this question a lot, where is the church? I've come to believe that the church does not arrive, but the church emerges. So when I look around Ferguson, I can point to places where I saw church, where I saw the church. And it changes the question for me from looking for the church to asking, where is God? God is definitely in the midst of the protests. God is definitely in the margins of our society. And wherever God is, church emerges. So I'll tell you one quick story of a woman named Mama Cat, who is in her 50s, I would say, who was out on the front line in Ferguson every day. And she was not one that was in front of the news cameras. No, her name is not in the newspaper. Everybody is not that way. But Mama Cat retired from the military with her husband, and she began to notice that in the height of protests, that people weren't going home, that 24 hours a day, young people were in the streets. Many of them didn't have homes, actually, and were not being fed nutritious meals. And so one day, when you all were seeing the visualization of young people in standoff with police across from the Ferguson Police Department that became real popular, she and her husband drove up in their truck onto the parking lot across the street from Ferguson Police Department and pulled out of the back of the truck 2 long church tables. Now, I'm not going to say where they got them from, I don't know, but 2 long church tables like we have our meals on, began to take linens out of the back seat of their car, put white linen tablecloths on those tables, brought out chafing dishes and food, and served buffet style anybody who wanted to eat. And we ate on curbs and we ate on hoods of cars while standing in protest across from the police. For me, I saw communion. I saw communion not in the sanitized way we do on First Sundays, but I saw the communion where Jesus welcomed everybody to the table, even Judas.
Yeah.
And I began to see church. So I suggest that maybe a question we should ask is, are we willing to join church wherever it is versus waiting for our sanitized images to materialize in places where they're foreign.
This is your discussion period.
Say good evening. Let me thank the panel for the information that's been provided this far. My name is Graylin Quarterman, and I am the newly elected president for the NAACP for Liberty County in the Hinesville, Georgia area. In making my remarks, one of the first things that my slate of office has done was we call all of the pastors in our county who would come to the first meeting that we had with pastors. And our thought was that if you're responsible for the soul of our community, then surely you are concerned about every other aspect of the people within our community. Where is the church? We previously had a service said beyond the walls, coming outside of the walls and going into the community. I think part of our issues is that we are a reactive people from history and not more of a proactive people. When something happened of tragedy within our community, you see everyone come massive, and then short form everybody hibernate back. And I think that as the church, and I wrote down, someone said that we must live our lives forward, but understand it backward. And we who are commissioned to win folks' soul and provide them information, we must get them to understand their life forward before they can live it forward. And we can't do that just in our church services. We've got to be more proactive. And what I'm trying to do with our branch is that everything we do, we're proactive. We are trying to feel the pulse of the community and find out what's going on in the community and educate, teach and educate them about how they can be a better people for themselves. And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to come outside of the walls. You know, it's nice to have that good church service on Sunday, but that's for the folks who are already know where they're at and can be empowered. But to go out there and get some of those folks who are somewhat confused and respond in an unrespectful way or in a violent way, or get caught up into the system out there because they don't understand the system. I think we ought to be, the church should be a little bit more proactive in trying to reach those folks instead of waiting till something happened and then reacting to it.
Okay. Doc, you got the next question? All right. So we have a question here.
Dr. Johnson, I just want you to go back to your opening statement. You referred to the Exodus passage and talked about how the Exodus was an economic impact on Pharaoh. And Pharaoh was addicted to profiting off of people. And then you asked the question, what does leaving and going to the wilderness look like for the black church? And I just want us to flesh that out, even in light of this colleague's comments about the church and the institution of the black church. What would it look like for us to go back to the wilderness? Because I want to posit that just as much as Pharaoh is addicted to profiting off of people, and I can critique the black church. I've been in the black church all my life, did my doctoral studies on the black church. The black church, too, is profiting off of people. What would it look like for us to go back to the wilderness?
Well, like I said, the first thing is to recapture a faith stance that doesn't look like, we had our discussion earlier about capitalism. I mean, we have internalized a lot of the foundational stuff of capitalism. You know, even to the point that we all have our iPads, right? And, you know, we all have our phones. We want the new phone. We want the best phone that's next. And so we've become addicted to the materialism that cost someone else their lives, right? And so I think there are two things that I would really suggest. The first is that we have to fast from media. So when we think about our 40-day Lenten fast, I say eat your chocolate, eat your fried chicken and your fish, but fast from the media. And you will find that you have no desire for your chocolate, no desire for your fried fish and your fried chicken, because messages are continually looped in our heads, right? Because the new message about the black church is that it's buffoonery, right? My theory is that once the black church mobilized with other black institutions and got Barack Obama elected as president, there was the realization yet again that the black church is powerful, right? And so what do we get now? We got preachers of LA, we got preachers' daughters, right? And because sometimes we just want to lay back and, you know, some people smoke weed on the way home and some of us go watch Preachers of LA so that we can decompress from operating in this world. Now, if you, don't say if you smoking weed in here. Because it takes a lot of energy to walk in this world, right? So I would say the first thing is to divest of the media, because the media causes our addictions, right? The second thing that I would suggest is to design your church and your faith communities to focus on children. How do you be proactive? You invest. Did you see that currency? It had a little white baby on it. Right? So all things that matter related to children have to be the focal point of the church. I call it equipping the saints. Right? Which is not going to bring you any extra money. Because, well, we don't think children have money. But if you watch that Frontline piece on Merchants of Cool, youth have millions of dollars at their disposal. And people in marketing know it. There was one marketing exec that said, "We see youth the way we saw Africa. They are resources to be extracted." Right? We know that this country continually makes money off of the things that youth create. So why in the church do we cart them off to the unpainted space in the fellowship hall and give them a picture of Jesus petting a lamb when everybody else is trying to recruit them into their thing? Right? So I would say the first two things: to stop engaging in their media. And the second thing, reorganize your ministry to look at the children in your church and to look at the children outside of the walls of your church.
Awesome.
And all else will follow. Because children are teachers. They help us to know the way forward. I know it's not what we teach in seminary, unless you're in Christian ed, right? But that's the reality. Whenever you see anything in the biblical text, it is about doing something for generations to come, right? The media wants us to look at our children as criminals. How do we look at our children, right? And, if I could give a third thing, the ways that I'll continue to say, the ways that we look at Scripture are through lenses of the same church that was built on top of the slave dungeons. If in Richmond I hear another sermon where somebody talks about us being filthy rags, I am truly going to get up and give some prophetic words. Pound, exclamation mark. So we have to be very conscious of the fact that we've been handed a religion that perverts our faith. So there's just certain things, just even images, words that we use, we just shouldn't use them in church. And I think that's kind of the first thing, but then also to divest. We talked about the amount of money that black people have at their disposal. What happens if you start to invest it in places that matter?
Good afternoon. Marvin Bentley, pastor of the Antioch Baptist Church in Corona, New York. I'm working with a group, the United Clergy Caucus, under the leadership of Dr. Calvin Butts and Bob Law and a number of clergy persons throughout the greater New York metropolitan area. And part of what we're doing is challenging our mayor and the police commissioner, William Bratton, to fire the officer that choked Eric Gardner to death. And we're pushing for that. But within that context, we've also been working with Bob Law, renowned personality, and he's put forth a proposal entitled No Justice, No Profit, which talks about joining the economic withdrawal movement and to stop buying fast food for 90 days starting June 1st. And targeting the youth, as you noted, Doctor, says, today I have not eaten fast food that I know contributes to heart disease, obesity, and diabetes. Today I will not feed my children foods that are dangerously high in sodium, saturated fats, and other harmful chemicals. Today I have not spent money with a business that shows only a depraved disregard for black life. Today I have not spent money supporting an industry that does not invest in black community nor support any struggles for justice and equality. Let's target and control our spending. And so that's what we're trying to push in the New York area. Just an answer to the question and the tag and a number of things that have already been touched on.
And then the reality is that there are people in your communities that have businesses. I grew up in Trinity. United Church of Christ, where Jeremiah Wright truly was the pastor, right? And so there were many, many ministries that he didn't create. They were from the wellspring of the people that were present, which is not necessarily the way that we teach being pastors. You know, if we want to talk about leaving Pharaoh's house, we've also got to leave Pharaoh's hierarchy. Right? I mean, because to be sure, many of us have been steeped, those of us that have the privilege have been steeped in this, I'm coming into this new church I've been called, and now I'm going to cast the vision for this church. As if the people didn't already have a call on their lives. Right? And so when we start to divest emotionally and mentally and economically, then we also have to replace it with something. Right? Well, we have our own stuff. Why can't we buy fried chicken in the south side of Chicago from people other than people from Jordan? Why is it that we have to go get our hair care products that we truly love from people from Korea and from China? We get our nails done by Koreans. Right? And it's not to say that those people shouldn't have some of our business, but they can't have all of it. I mean, so, you know, it's the whole thing about the church understanding that the very nature of being people is political, right? And you have to carve out spaces where you can be healthy without ODing on fried chicken or crack. Say something.
You're talking good. You're talking real good. To kind of piggyback and to caveat on this environment, this construct, a lens of how the church can or has can do it better, but has neglected to really be community. There are several things that kind of jumped out as we were kind of dialoguing and studying. This leader-centered community that you talked about, that the church has created a messianic view of leadership, where the pastor becomes almost Pharaoh. The pastor has this savior in a suit mentality. Ella Baker, for years, told us to avoid this kind of concept of this one central figure that leads everybody. In that, if that central figure ever goes down, the whole movement goes down. We got this. Now, we got this from the, again, you cannot neglect history from reality. We got this from the historical presence of the black church, usually from 1900 to about 1960s. The black church being the center of the black community, where the pastor was usually the most educated person in the community. So everything that the community needed, they went to the black church in order to achieve it. Whether it was legal assistance, whether it was financial assistance, whether it was encouragement, affirmation, you name it, it happened in the black church. Well, I would argue the black church is no longer the center of the black community. It's no longer the case. There are more black folk outside of church than there are in church today. But we've taken the same model and made it applicable to today, even though the context and the cultural milieu has changed. So now we still operate as if pastor doesn't say, or if pastor doesn't give us direction, then we are disempowered and cannot function. So the leader-driven or leader-centered community's got to transition to a people-centered community. Where the church engages and empowers and strengthens others to see their, in Luther's words, universal priesthood of believers, where everybody gets a chance to go and engage with Christ and see what their calling is. We've also had this debilitating focus on institutional sustainment. to the point where the church itself exists so that the church itself can survive. The church does not exist to empower others. It does not exist to engage community and to become a transformative presence in those communities, but rather it makes sure we can pay the assessment. It makes sure that everything we do is based on institutional sustainment. Another piece we got to look at is small theology. Just small theology. For so long, we made it illegal for people to ask questions in church, especially young people. We made it almost illegal for them to engage in questioning and engage in critical analysis of our go-to faith professions. God is not so insecure in his divinity that he can't handle the questions of humanity. We got to create an environment where young people have the right, the authority, and they are even encouraged to ask questions. To ask questions, and then not create this us versus them judgmental dynamic for the people who do ask questions, where we end up putting folk out because they ask questions we can't answer. The last one is this what I call the sacred sin of respectability. Sacred sin of respectability. It is worshiping the image we represent before others at the expense of the freedom to be who we really are. We rather look a certain way to engage and continue this idea of being respected and being revered and honored rather than examining the reality of where we are. This Black Lives Matter movement has challenged our sacred sins of respectability. Young folk are not impressed with image. They are governed by what they see, integrity. So attempting, in many cases what the church has done is we've attempted to teach freedom to others, unconscious of our own chains. We've attempted to take this gospel and take this Christ and make it an instrument of freedom for others, but ignore the fact that we are jingling chains and fetters every time we make steps forward. This need to be respectable forces us not to deal with relevant issues and not to deal with the realities that really make us guilty of the same oppression we claim to fight. So we got to wrestle. We got to wrestle with these and come to grips with them. I mean, you can't be freed from something you won't admit you have. So churches have to do this. We've got to dialogue. We've got to go from the elevated pulpit teaching the people to the pulpit now sitting on the level with the people and dialoguing through community, through connection, through conversations. Now, Ray got the same power as Reverend Johnson. Ray got a word to share, and Reverend Johnson has to listen. Now that black queer sister who's on the usher board because she can't be in front of the people singing in the choir now has the opportunity to grab the microphone and say some things that Mother Serenity and Sis Mayweather need to hear so that they understand who's really in the room and who they really represent.
Greetings, and I thank you both very much for your words. My name is Malcolm Bird. I'm the pastor of the Jackson Memorial AME Zion Church in Hempstead, New York. There's some folk from Hempstead here. I experienced some significant mechanical delays on the plane I was riding on coming down here, so to say that I'm happy to be here would be an unfortunate understatement. I want to push us a little further on this issue of community and what community looks like in the context of the black church. The black church, as we know, primarily born out of the struggle for human liberation and dignity. But in my experience, my very brief experience as serving as a pastor, there might be need for some significant liberation for those who actually sit on the pews. The fact that we perhaps should or could be liberated from this ideal that says that since that didn't occur around where I live, that is not a problem for me. This understanding of what beloved community is, I think, is really of great necessity for us to have conversation and perhaps to redefine. In San Francisco, where I served before coming to Hempstead, the same issue occurred in San Francisco as we are experiencing in Hempstead now. Reverend, why are you getting up there talking about these things regarding the school board, regarding black-on-black crime? That doesn't affect us. We live outside of this neighborhood. In the context of San Francisco, gentrification had a significant part of what occurred on Golden Gate Avenue. In Hempstead, what we are finding now, though Dr. Cedric Easley, who's sitting here at the table, we had this conversation yesterday about what occurred in Hempstead a few days ago regarding our latest school board election. That a significant number of those who ran came to the black church in the village of Hempstead. Every one of them lost who came by the black church, because there was not a significant understanding of the fact that for the most part, the persons who attended, at least my congregation, drove in from outside of Hempstead, and they were not voters. So what does community look like? How can we build beloved community in the context of the local, traditional black church as we know it, when most of our people, for the most part, don't live in the epicenter of problem and challenge around our churches?
He makes me go first. When I was doing my dissertation, I was looking at Mississippi. And the communities were named after the churches that resided there. So my grandmother, though she lived in the city of Rose Hill, she grew up in the community of Mount Olive, which is Mount Olive. And so in some senses, the land determines community and not this superficial construct of race. Because people know they have to live together, and so they have to come up with shared principles of how to do that and how to protect that. So while some of us may have the privilege of driving in and out, some of us still have to maintain the fire of living there. I mean, so, and that whole idea of community is known by people that embrace racism, which is why they continually move black people around, right? So the first thing that happened with black communities is that freeways went through it, right? And then we have housing projects. But growing up in Chicago, that housing project neighborhood was a powerful political force. Dorothy Tillman came out with her hat and mobilized the people in those housing projects. So while some of us had the privilege of living in another neighborhood and being fed images about the people that lived in the projects, those people, those residents, embodied community in a way that none of us will ever understand, which is why they were destroyed. Right? Which is why we get this image of violence and why we get this image of drug stuff, right? And why it is that the lights are never turned on in the housing projects until there's going to be a raid and the elevators are turned off. A study was done by the U of C using rats to determine how people would treat each other once resources were taken away. So if you read the work of Mindy Thompson Fuller, her article, along with, it may have been her husband, on forced serial displacement, talks about how housing policies continually disrupt black families and black communities. And she says the aftermath of that is, or the epigenetic effect is what she calls it. She says what happens to one generation is felt 3 generations later. Violence becomes the language of displacement, right? Disease becomes the manifestation of displacement. Poverty is the aftermath of displacement, right? And so some of us that are privileged, who lived in these stable black communities, are now seeing onslaughts of black people that we don't recognize. So the next part of that displacement is to destabilize those stable black communities, right? We buy ugly houses in your neighborhood, and we make them Section 8 houses, and we destroy the community of people that took care of one another's children while somebody else went to work, right? And we're not relocating everybody from the housing projects, because in Chicago, if you owed anything on your electricity, if you owed anything on your rent, you could not participate in the relocation plans. So those in stable communities saw 30 people going in and out of this Section 8 house. And our understanding of respectability, and you can't be braiding your hair on the front porch. We don't do that, right? When in reality, 3 of those people were given license to be in the house. And except for their understanding of God's hospitality, 27 people would have been homeless. And so we have to understand that it is the land that determines community. It is not income, it's not even race, but it is how do we survive together in this land. And there have to be some churches that are so invested in this space called community that the community will call the community after the name of that church.
Yeah, that's real good. I'm in the same boat. I'm in the same boat. Pastor in a place called Edge Hill, section of South Nashville, extremely gentrified area, particularly in the last 7 to 10 years. Our church is across the street from the housing projects, literally across the street, and we have been connected to that community as long as they've been there. Our church was built in 1956, so we've been in that community since. But it's we are very, very fortunate to have a strong number of folk who attend our church that still live in the community. Yet every week, those citizens that live in the community are receiving predatory realtor harassment. Sell your house. If you don't, such and such is going to take your house. And they're targeting, of course, seniors. They're targeting children of seniors who have recently passed. So you have young persons, or in many cases even older adults, but who are not aware of the property value. They know what they paid for it when they built it, but they're not aware that it's been doubled and tripled since the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So there is this effort to displace, this effort to claim this environment as its own, as their own. The approach I've taken, and I really can't tell you how it is, because it takes probably 10 to 15 years to really see what it looks like. But the approach we've taken, because we've had such growth from outside of the community, is we've made a decision as a congregation. We're going to stay in this community, number one. Number two, not only are we going to stay in this community, but what's going to help us stay in this community is that we engage those already in the community to become a part of the church community. So while we're growing and doctors are joining and persons from surrounding counties are connecting, we make sure we are intentional about doing things such as we call intergenerational conversations, where every generation sits at a table, dialogues, discusses. So now when we hear of shots being fired in the housing project, or we hear of raids, or we hear of violence taking place in the housing project, it is no longer them over there. Now it's Sister Betty that I ate dinner with is struggling in that community. What can we do to help Sister Betty? Giving names to those persons and those categories of people that we can so easily detach ourselves from by just calling them them. When we get a name, we get a face, and we meet people and we connect personally with them, suddenly their plight becomes our plight. So connecting and building community intentionally within the church with those persons who are already in the community. It's hard, brother. Sir, listen, it is hard teaching. We streaming. It is hard. Yeah, we streaming. It's hard. It's hard teaching the black bourgeoisie. I got another phrase I want to use, but it's hard teaching the black bourgeoisie that community exists beyond their socioeconomic climate. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard because of this idea that we're bootstrappers. We pulled ourselves up. If I made it, you can make it. There's no excuse why you can't. All of that. But again, intentional community building, and I'll let you know how it goes. But that's one of the ways we're trying.
So we have questions here, and Coach here, and then we'll good afternoon.
What I want to say is that I'm Sam Talbot, President of National Baptist Convention of America. And I have sat quiet through the other meeting and tried to do it in this one. But I heard words like assessment, I think Dr. Johnson, and the openness from the pastor of Walnut Grove. And what I want to share is that on another level, one of the ills I see in our community as it relates to the church is the denominational work, or the conventions. And back June last year, I was elected the 15th president of our convention. It's over 100 years old. Sat with the board of directors of about 33 people. They wanted me to give them my vision for National Baptist Convention of America. And I shared with them that my vision for National Baptist Convention of America would come from God through National Baptist Convention of America. And so for now a year almost, we've been in strategic planning. And I'm hoping that by me saying this and we streaming, the model may leak out. That they still don't have my vision. Because we have given everybody at the convention, every delegate in one focus group or another, an opportunity to talk about what they want this convention to do. And what has really come out, they want us to help resource churches. Because it's time out for the convention to be served by congregations. The time now is for the convention to serve its local congregations that voluntarily, in our case, affiliate with the convention. And I'm amazed at what the convention would have missed if one Sam Talbot would have given a vision. Over against what has happened through many people, and Dr. David Golder, who sits here, was brought in as a facilitator, which that was different, because we brought somebody in from another convention to facilitate strategic planning in our Black Baptist Convention. And there was some pushback, but I had made my mind up that the only thing they could do was vote me out. And it was worth it, but the convention now, I believe, is on its way to be a premier African-American, in this case, Baptist convention, because we're hearing from the constituents who have some marvelous ideas. And I'm going to close by saying that they've come up with 4 areas that they want us to work on, and that's leadership development, church development, mission development, and economic development. And they want us to figure out how to do all of that through collaboration. That's why I'm here at the NAACP today, because my convention has said to me through the input from the strategic planning, we've got to collaborate. We can't do all of this stuff by ourselves. And we want to partner with the NAACP and other groups so that we can do the work, Dr. Coates, some of the work that you're doing. And I'm just saying this in front of all of us, that I think that needs to be the new wave. I know some congregations are doing it, but denominations are going to have to consider sitting, those of us who sit in positions of leadership in denominations, and listen to the people who put the money in the offering plate, who are going to put the feet on the plan, and they'll have buy-in of a plan if they gave some input to the plan. So I'm hoping that we can start a revolution through all of our black denominations to do it a different way. And keep working like this. Freddie Haynes will be with us after a while.
Wow. Can the panelists, is it streaming? Are we streaming? Oh my God. Doc, do not look at that camera.
I just want to.
Panelists, please respond to that.
Yeah, I just, and I think that's it from the wellspring. You know, I've been sitting in Exodus probably for the last 6 years, right? Primarily because for our people it's been go down Moses, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And now it's time to unearth the rest. The reality is that Moses was put into action because of the cries of the community. So what then does it mean for us to shift our understanding? You know, as even the educated show, you know, it's what W.E.B. Du Bois repented for in his last days. He said, I wish I had never talked about a talented tenth, because it's only the masses of people that can usher us out of this mess. So then, you know, for those of us that are privileged around the room, what does it look like to go into the offices and the classrooms where we serve and immediately think about nurturing a called people? What does it mean for us to nurture this congregation in front of me, to have enough agency and courage to birth the dreams that God has already placed in them, right? So whereas race defines your value, right? What we're saying here is that each of us are born with the DNA of God, with power and purpose that ushers us all back to what it means to be human and embrace the rest of creation. I mean, it's a shift in the way we think, right? Because Thomas Jefferson decided it for us. What it means to be civilized. You have to own land. You have to own slaves. And women will only participate the way you define their participation. And so we've embraced racism, we've embraced classism, we've just negated creation, because you can do with your land whatever you want. You can plant as much tobacco as you want, right? Without any concern for the cycles of nature, right? And if you're really a man, you tell your women where to sit, right? So when I think about Exodus, what does Pharaoh say when Moses says, you know, let my people go? Pharaoh says, all right, all the men can go, but leave the women and the children. So what you've left is your wisdom and your hope. So in church then, if we embrace their model of Christianity, we will always be without wisdom and we will always be without hope until all of us can go to the wilderness together to worship. we're just making incremental steps on being included in a system that's killing all of creation and everybody that walks on this planet. So what does it mean to nurture everybody's gift that God has placed in them, and not just your own as the pastor?
Selah. There is, I think, innate duplicity within the church. To avoid this monolithic approach to church, but I think there are some comprehensive attributes, if you will, that are applicable across the board. To relinquish our duplicity, we cry freedom, we cry justice. Those of us who see Jesus and justice as inseparable. We fight for social justice. I think we do that. But there's this concept that Dr. Geis Johnson has unveiled of this Jeffersonian approach to manhood and humanity that we've adopted. Now, we cannot be a valuable voice for social justice if we are silencing the voices of our own. We end up neutralizing our moral integrity and our leadership leverage. Loud on race inequity in society. Church, we love to rail against that, but quiet on gender inequity in our own churches. Using behavior as a basis for determining the value of another's civil rights. We don't have time to run into the LGBTQ question and issues of community. Regardless of what your faith profession may be, humanity is humanity, and civil rights ought to be the right of every individual in our churches. And it's hard for the church to become that valuable voice in against speaking for social justice when the world looks at us like, for real? Y'all got stuff to say about justice? The world sees us and culture sees us as talking out of both sides of our neck. And so we've got to deal with and relinquish our duplicity, our willingness to fight strong on some issues, but to ignore our own injustices in others. And it's based upon what we were taught. We got to be relearned, if you will.
So we're going to get this note from Dr. Coates, and then we are on time. I know we have to close out with our charge, Dr. Goldie. So for the stream, we will have Dr. Coates, and then we'll get Dr. Goldie, and then we'll close out. I know some other questions that we have, but for our stream, we've got to keep this time moving. So Dr. Coates.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Delman Coates. I pastor Mount Enon Baptist Church in Clinton, Maryland. And I'm also president of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality, which is a public policy advocacy group for progressive black churches and pastors. I think it's important when we talk about the black church to really be clear about what we're referencing. There's a difference between the black church and a church of blacks. The black church is a historiographical reference to that subset of African American Christianity that's been on the side of the fight for freedom, justice, and equality. And so for me, when I talk about the black church, I'm talking about that subset of, African American Christianity. I want to thank Chairwoman Brock, Dr. Goatley, bless you, and Bishop Proctor for this conversation today, and certainly to Dr. Geis Johnson and Pastor Faison for the dialogue and conversation. I just want to say that I want to kind of go back to something that Dr. Geis Johnson mentioned at the beginning, and that has to do with the sort of economic dimensions of this intersection between faith, race, and politics. Because I spend a lot of my time thinking about the archaeology of injustice. That is, what are some of the causal factors that create the conditions, the symptoms around which we struggle, whether it's healthcare, the environment, criminal justice reform, mass incarceration, education, jobs, employment, et cetera. I spend a lot of my time wrestling with thinking about what are the causal factors that create injustice. And I think we need to spend more time thinking about the archaeology of injustice, because, or else we'll spend more of our time addressing symptoms rather than causes, right? There's this test that doctors used to give in many European countries and mental health institutions, where in order to determine whether a patient was fit and ready to be released from the hospital, they would bring that patient into a room. They would turn on the water faucet, let the water run, spill on the floor, and they would give that patient a mop and a bucket. And they would tell that patient to go into the room and clean up the water. Now, if the patient just took the mop and the bucket and started sweeping the floor, they knew the patient was not ready to be released. Why? Because the water was still running. But if the patient went into the room first, Bishop, and turned off the faucet first, and then mopped the floor, they knew that that patient was fit and ready to be released. I find that in many of our conversations around the range of issues that confront us as a people in the community, we're mopping the floor and not addressing the faucet. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about what's the archaeology of our injustice. And it's because of that that I find myself really focused on the issue around the fact that we have a usury-based money system in our society that creates conditions in which there's always not enough money in the money supply that people are able to earn via work to pay that money back for houses or cars and food, things of that nature. And so I think that there's grossly absent in today's political and civil rights conversations a thorough understanding of our money system. And for me as a person of faith, when I think about the witness of Jesus, when I think about the notion, Dr. Geis Johnson, that you talked about in terms of developing this sort of alternative interpretive lens or new interpretive lens or hermeneutic, we tend to think that the story of the so-called Good Samaritan has to do with the help that was provided the man after he got robbed. But the message of the text, in my mind, certainly there's the need to provide care and compassion and charity for the man after he was robbed. But the message of the text is also thinking about why were the conditions on the Jericho Road the way that they were in the first place? Why did those robbers feel so comfortable setting up shop on the Jericho Road? Why wasn't there better policing? Why wasn't there better street lights? Why weren't there better jobs, right? And so our role and responsibility in my mind is to think about the archaeology of injustice and to really spend more time on that, because as the chairwoman has stated in the brochure, the real focus is about action, and that action has to be proactive and not just reactive. So I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this, and I want to say it again, because we have a money system in which there's not enough money in the money supply to meet the money that has to be paid back. We have a usury-based monetary system in our culture and in our society, where the public benefit of money creation inures to the benefit of a small group of private individuals, private financiers, and private bankers, rather than to the benefit of the public. Just as a small example of that, if I gave the two people to my right and the two women to my left $100 each at 10% interest, they owe me $440 back. But there's only $400 in the system. So regardless of how much they go to school, how much education they get, how hard they work, and how many hours they work, because I have established a usury-based money system that inures to the benefit of a small group of individuals, me in this example, there's never enough money in the money supply to meet the needs of the people who have to pay that back. Right? The only way, and we have a system that is addicted to stimulus and debt, because the only way to falsely juice the system to give people more money to, in theory, meet the needs is to put more money and stimulus in the system. So what I think is that we need a more sustained critique on our money system, which is where you started, which is in many ways where Jesus ended, for those who follow Jesus, where in this last days of his life, he goes into Jerusalem, he turns over the table of the money changers. What? Some problematic English translations give the impression that his critique is of business. His critique is not that there's a bookstore in the temple. His critique, he turns over the temple not because they're selling t-shirts in the temple. That is not why he's doing this. He's doing this because in order for people to participate in the economy, people coming into Jerusalem from Judea have to change their local money system into the currency of the temple of the shekel. And the money changers had established a usury-based money system where in order to get currency, it inured to the benefit of a small group of people based on debt. We have a debt-based money system rather that inures a private debt-based money system. There's nothing that is created by our Federal Reserve System. There's nothing federal or governmental about the Federal Reserve. It is no more federal than Federal Express. It's a private corporation that inures to the benefit of a small group of financiers. Everything foundationally about money theory, internationally and nationally, has always been about and there is, even within our religious traditions, a critique of usury-based money systems, because you will inherently have a system. You will inherently have a system where someone is not going to be able to earn enough, work enough, cut enough grass, whatever, cut enough hair to earn enough resources. This is why, in my mind, why we have some of the proliferating symptoms in our culture. And I would rather spend more time trying to figure out how we address the economic loaf in our society rather than figuring out how we can disseminate more of the economic crumbs. And I really became more acutely aware of this 2 years ago when I ran for lieutenant governor in Maryland, as I would go around cities in our state like Baltimore, and you would see neighborhoods and streets where if you didn't know better, you would think it was abandoned and no one lived there. But people do. And I kept saying to myself, why are there cities like this in America with all of the money that we have, when you can read the reports of the General Accounting Office where they will give the Fed $7 trillion in off-the-book assets, $9 trillion here. We have the money as a society, but we have a money system. We have a private usury-based money system rather than a public usury-based money system. And I think that if we are to address the intersection between faith, race, and politics, we need a more sustained focus on the archaeology of our injustice, the origins and the causes of our injustice, or else we will leave spaces like this. Some will go fight for environmental justice because this is their issues. Others will focus on LGBT issues. Others will focus on, housing and the real estate. But if we can figure out a search for common ground in our advocacy and in our work, then perhaps it's possible, Pastor Tolbert, Dr. Tolbert, perhaps it's then possible to develop a sustained movement where we can have focus on an issue that unites us rather than divides us. And so I want to thank you, Dr. Geis Johnson, for beginning us with this issue of the economy, currency, because it's the commodification of paper, fiat paper, that creates why we are where we are today in my mind. Thank you for inviting me.
So this is our charge, we're going to have Dr. David Goatley, who is the CEO of the Lot Carrier Mission. Have you enjoyed this discussion so far? I tell you, it's been amazing to be here. And again, we're going to close with this. And of course, if you want to engage in more dialogue, there is time to talk together and fellowship as we're getting ready for our reception tonight. Dr. Goatley is the CEO of Lot Carrier, a global Christian mission community founded in 1897, which extends the Christian witness throughout the world. Lot Carrier shares prayer partnership, financial support, and technical assistance with communities that are engaged in ministries of evangelism, compassion, empowerment, and advocacy. Dr. Goatley, his background, he earned his degree from the University of Louisville, Southern Baptist Theological Seminary with his MDiv and PhD. He's a global strategist and also a member of the board of directors of the NAACP and co-chair of our Religious Affairs Committee, and he has been charged with the charge. So you've heard the dialogue, and now it's time to get our marching orders. So please welcome Dr. Goatley as we close.
I want to join my colleague, Chairman of the Religious Affairs Committee of the National Board of Directors for the NAACP, Bishop Proctor, in expressing our gratitude for all of you and all of us who are sharing our time and insight and conversation to stimulate some creativity, to provoke new ways of thinking, and to seek to move forward an agenda for justice. We're grateful also for the leadership of Chairwoman Rosalind Brock and for being the architect behind the Leadership 500 movement. In 1975, 40 years ago, Desmond Tutu was elevated to be the dean of the Anglican Church in Johannesburg. It was the first time a black person had been appointed to that office. At that time, most of the anti-apartheid leadership in South Africa was either in exile or in prison. And Desmond Tutu discerned in his opportunity and his appointment that he had been given a privilege of platform that most people didn't have. And that he decided that because he had that privilege of platform of being a leader of a religious community, that he would seek to use that platform to articulate the anguish and the aspiration of his people. And I think for all of us who have any opportunity for religious leadership, it's a privileged platform that most people do not have. And so the question is what we do with that privilege. Will we dishonor the privilege to build our personal brand, which we heard some reference to with some of the media, whatever, that's popular in terms of the entertainment value of people who call themselves religious leaders? Are we going to try to advance a personal brand? Or are we going to use that platform and you be a good steward of that platform to articulate the anguish and the aspiration of the people who don't have that platform, who don't have that voice, who may be at the margins? I think that's an opportunity that we have to decide what to do with. I think we've been challenged and encouraged in this afternoon of conversation to be stewards of that platform. In 1987, when Desmond Tutu was installed as the bishop of the Anglican Church in South Africa, in his comments at the St. George Cathedral in Cape Town, he talked about the concept of Ubuntu, which is a Xhosa word and Zulu word that there's no real exact English translation for. Some people have talked about the idea of I am because we are. But in his address, Archbishop Tutu said that one way of understanding the term of Ubuntu is being bound up together in the bundle of life. And so when we realize as leaders of faith communities that we're bound up together, irrespective of geography, whether we're driving in and driving out, irrespective of socioeconomic location, that we're in this thing together. And when we're committed to that kind of concept, then we can be instruments and tools that help bring the idea of justice to be more of a reality. So we're grateful for this table that gathers people who have the privilege to be on the platform and charge us to be good stewards because we're bound up together in the bundle of life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goldie, and thank you all for attending. I want to thank Bishop Proctor, Dr. Geis Johnson, Pastor Faison for your time, your energy, Dr. Coates. We just want to honor and thank you all for coming. Do you have any closing remarks before we transition? I just want to offer the floor to our chair. We need to put you on a microphone because we're streaming live. Yeah. Are we still streaming?
I think the words have already been said in this room, but I just wanted to add my voice on behalf of the leadership, national board members who are in the room. I just want you to stand, our national leaders who are on our national board of directors who are in the room, and then also on our religious affairs committee. And would they stand as well? Dr. Freddie Haynes is on our Religious Affairs Committee, and Dr. Coates is on our Religious Affairs Committee as well. And so, and it is open to faith leaders. And so we ask that you will join us in this faith work. It was race and politics, and if you look at if you have not already registered, race and politics, that RIP means rest in peace. It was a play on the word with the anguish and the agony that we've been experiencing in our communities. We want race, the negative perils of race, to rest in peace. And so that's, it's prophetic in that, and that's what we wanted you to be able to tease out. But friends, I want you at this time to give a special, special thank you for a woman in this room who has led our health movement in the NAACP. She has moved this bar forward. The organization has been richer, is richer because of her leadership, her faith walk, and the woman that she is, and that God has had anointing all over her. I want you to say thank you so much to Siobhan Arline Bradley. Y'all can do better than that. I wanted to make sure as we were streaming that folk know who really puts this all together. Siobhan Arline Bradley. Faith is a construct of who we are as a people. May we never forget from whence we've come and the bridges that have brought us over. Thank you again so very much. And Siobhan, you have the last word, my friend.
Yes, I'm going to pay my chair later. Amen. So nice. It is an honor. Many of you do know I am going on to a new position, but I am still here with the NAACP. I will be working for the United States Surgeon General in my next position. The shade that I'm getting all the way from Dallas. But it does not mean that we leave the work. We have an amazing staff. And I just want to say this. Leadership 500 has brought a lot of us together. I don't know if you all know the stories behind this, but the reason I'm even here is because my branch president sent me to Leadership 500 6 years ago. She said, you have to go. Well, we did whatever she said, so we were afraid of her. She's, okay, yes, ma'am. And we went, and I remember seeing this, who is this Rosalind Brock lady? Who are these people? Who are they? And they make fun of me. I said, you sure? I'll do whatever you say. Well, I didn't know that meant I was going to be working for the NAACP, but I did not have that on the radar screen. But look how God has grown this. I look at this room and look at the work, and I have mentors in our chair, and Dr. Gottlieb, Bishop Proctor, Dr. Haynes. I mean, we are so blessed to be doing this work. Got family doing this work. STVU is in the house. I've been tweeting about STVU. So if anybody wants a degree in theology, come on. Samuel with Proctor School of Theology is on the radar screen. But I think it is important for us actually to engage in prayer. I think we should close in the word of prayer, because what we talked about today can change the face of our people. I don't even know if we understand the ministry that we are called to be in. And I'm not even talking about just your church. I'm talking about your function as Black in America. That is your calling, to be a face for the people. And I heard you, Doc, and I heard you, Pastor, and I want to just challenge this for the young people, because he talks to me, and Sammy, they bring this to us all the time. We always call the chairman, Madam Chair, what you going to do for the 20-somethings, for the 30-somethings? Because quite frankly, in 20 years, that's the next president. This room is so different 20 years from now. My little cousin is here. She'll be 32 in 20 years. She'll be running something. And the question is, has the church prepared her? Has the NAACP prepared her? Mom and dad can do a lot, but the context around the community, who are her mentors? Who is she seeing? Does she want to be like you? And if she doesn't, shame on you. That's the clarion call for me to Micah's mom. And in 20 years, I want him to know that when he's 21, he would have a college degree, because he saw his mom and dad. He saw Dr. Haynes. He saw Pastor Uncle John, he calls him. That's what I want. And so I believe that God is calling us to the next level. I believe God is charging the NAACP to stay connected to him. And to never leave him, because that's why we've been here 106 years, because we didn't. Whether you like us or not, he has kept us. And so I believe he will continue to keep us, and he will not allow the division to come. So I speak against division. I speak against divided motives. I speak unity and life in the association, and I speak new blood into the business. So let's close. God, we thank you. We are so grateful, God, for life, because someone doesn't have life. Mothers are burying sons every single day. These pastors in this room are burying boys because of bullets, because of lack of understanding, because of self-hate, because of misunderstanding of their power. So God, I thank you for life. I thank you for this NAACP. I thank you for the motives and the agendas being left at the door, and truth and transparency and comfortability with common cause allowed us to come in this place today, God. Thank you for a full room about faith. What a blessing, God. We thank you so much, Lord, for new mercies every morning. The mercy of being here safely, God. The mercy of bringing our chairman, bringing our president, bringing our religious leaders, bringing our parents, bringing our children to Orlando, Florida. There was a time we couldn't even meet here. But God, you allowed us to see this place. God, we thank you for who you are. We thank you because we know whose we are. And we thank you that we will continue to be in victory because we are your children. God, we speak to the policymakers, to the legislators, God, bring this country to a new place. I pray for the president. I pray for even the leaders of the House and the Senate, God, that you will change hearts and change minds, God, and let righteousness reign in this government, oh God. Lord, I pray for the movement of this association, that our leaders will stay on the course. They won't get distracted by what people say, by the media, but we will be moving together. Different lanes to the same destination, oh God. There's enough room at the table for everyone, God. And so we thank you for inclusivity. We thank you for diversity. But ultimately, God, we thank you for your son, who you sent unscathed, clean vessel to die for us, who deserve nothing. You've given us platforms, and we deserve nothing. You've given us privilege to have health care, to have families, to have a home to go to. There's someone that doesn't have that, God. So we thank you for that. We pray for the rest of this weekend, God, that there'll be some rest, but there'll also be some revolution after this weekend. You will change this L500 thing to something crazy. They'll say, oh my God, I've got to go home and do something. Lord, bring us home safely. Let us enjoy this Memorial Day weekend. Let us honor you by honoring ourselves and honoring the next generation today. Lord, we love you. We trust that you have our best intention, God, and we trust that there is a prize at the end of this race. Yes. We believe you, sir, for what you have and what you will do. In Jesus' name we pray and we believe. Amen. Now let's go have some fun.